John Brodie, who's born in Portland, Oregon, and he's been painting for over 20 years with explorations in book art, prints, and multiple mixed media and sculpture. He was included in Basquiat's PDX 2010 biennial, and from 1996 to 2006 was a member of 333 Studios, whose collective and fine art studio. In 2009, he produced Store for a Month, an art exhibit and temporary store in Portland, which was based on Foss Oldenburg's famous store from 1961. And I wish we had the Oldenburg over in the corner still, but it's been taken down. And in 2010, he opened Monograph Bookworks, which is right down the street from my house. I go all the time. You may recall that he was also from 1988 to 2007. He managed La Luna, a Portland club, and then also Martini. In 2000, he opened La Happy, a great French restaurant, which I also go to all the time. So you're a man of many talents. And in 2014, in April, so next spring, he will have a solo exhibit at Linfield College. So congratulations. To look forward to.
Thanks.
I will turn it over to John Brodie.
Thanks a lot. Thanks everyone for coming. Appreciate it. So also this is going to be informal, so please if you have any questions, just chime right in. I'll maybe ramble a bit, so feel free to keep me on track or ask any questions as you have them. So this painting is by Oliver Lee Jackson. He's alive. He lives in the Bay Area. He's about 78. He was born in St. Louis in 1935, and I didn't know a lot about him, and most people don't know a lot about him. There's only been one person who I've mentioned to this painting to that I was doing a talk on this that knew who he was. And part of the reason I chose this is mostly I saw this painting about 10 years ago at the museum, and it was one of those things that I responded to right away. Partly because it's sort of in a style I was trying to emulate at the time, partly because of its scale, and I think also because it was one of those like, who is this guy things? You know, like, who is this guy? I tried to find more information about him at the time when the internet was not as, you know, like it is now where you can find out everything about anybody. So I didn't really know that much about him. So it was sort of a bit of a mystery, which maybe drew me to it even more. And so it's something also, the reason I chose it for this talk is it's kind of like, for me, a marker in my own practice. It's something I come back to and look at every time I'm here just to see, like, do I still like it? Am I painting that way anymore? Do I not like it? How has my work changed in relation to what I see this? It was sort of earlier in the work I was doing, and I still try and, I guess what I should say is it's a style of painting I still believe in and still like very much, but it's not really a style of painting that I'm working in right now. And it's maybe something I'll come back to. The other thing I should probably say is that I think it's maybe a painting that a lot of people would say that they maybe don't like so much. And I don't know, you know, it's because I don't think it's, for me, when I think about art or the art I sort of am drawn to, it's always, the word I use is interesting. I like things that are interesting. It doesn't really have to be beautiful. It doesn't, you know. So for me, the sort of key quality for something to be, is just for it to be interesting. And I thought this painting was interesting. Well, why don't I talk a bit about what I know about the painting? Because I've done sort of, having to do this talk, I did even more looking into who this guy is. And so he lives in Oakland. He's probably, I would say he's sort of well-known in the Oakland area and well-known in the Bay Area. He taught at Sacramento State College for 30 years. And I think he's sort of just a lifelong painter. He's still painting. He's really passionate. He's still painting in a similar style, although it's developed in a different way, which I'll talk about. But it's really interesting. I think he lives in a, I read recently, he lives in a 5,600 square foot warehouse. And he lives there and he just paints. And I kind of got the impression that he doesn't have family, doesn't have kids, although I don't really know that much about his personal life. His most recent show was in 2012, so last year at the Contemporary Art Museum St. Louis, where he grew up. And it was large-scale monotypes on paper, so like 4 feet by 6 feet, works on paper. He's really an adept sculptor. He sculpts in marble and in wood, and he's really good at drawing. And so what's interesting about this painting is looking at it, you would think he's a big sloppy painter. The museum also has about 10 or 12 drawings by him, which I was able to go see. They have them in the Haber study room. I requested to have a look, and they let me see him, which is really nice. And he's a really, a lot of his drawings, or some of the drawings, I should say, are very realistic figures, which is really interesting because this doesn't have much realism going on at all. It has like, these vague figures or creatures in it, but some of the drawings are very detailed pencil drawings. But in all of them, there's always this kind of swirling thing going on around them, which is happening in this painting. So maybe I'll talk a little bit about sort of some of the things I've learned about what he's doing here. And there was one of his larger shows was about the time he painted this, 1982, at the Seattle Art Museum. They had a painting show by him. And a lot of works in this probably was what this series was. And so he talks a lot about the people or the creatures that are in his paintings, and he calls them paint people. He doesn't see them as real people. They're sort of alluding to something, and they're not, sometimes they have arms and legs, sometimes they're just a floating head or torso. Sometimes they have eyes, sometimes they don't. But he doesn't see them as, I guess, he doesn't see them as straight, this is supposed to be a person. It's supposed to be something else. So I think a lot of his work is about, he's trying to create a feeling in his work, and an image, and it's a world he's trying to recreate. And a lot of his paintings throughout the years, even to the work that he's doing in the present, although it's changed a little bit, it's still this kind of ethereal, swirling world. And to a certain degree, I really respect that he's still trying to do the same thing, or he still is doing the same thing. So a lot of these people, he's come up with sort of what I call it sort of like a library of symbols that he uses over and over. And a lot of them are these sort of trumpeting characters in here. Also there's this guy, which is the guy with the hat. And he calls the guy with the hat sort of like a judge, although the way he explains is it's not really a judge in the sense of sort of like a moral judge or someone judging the other people. He kind of describes it as sort of, he's like the anchor in his world. It's sort of the guy around which the other creatures or other people organize themselves. So it's sort of in most of his paintings, it's there's sort of groupings of people or groupings of creatures, and then somewhere in there there'll be this fellow with the hat. And it's kind of interesting in that he doesn't ever, also what he talks about, he doesn't ever really reveal what his paintings are about. He doesn't really believe in that. He'll talk about some of what the things allude to and some of the themes he's interested in, but he'll never explain a painting, and he doesn't think, I think he believes that no one should really ever explain a painting. I think he believes, like, I've made this work, and it's for the viewer. He wants to create a work that is sort of the viewer can respond to, and the viewer can insert their own meaning into it. And I think that kind of goes along with, he's sort of trying to create a world that has this sort of rawness or this power to it that people will respond to, that you don't necessarily need to say, this is about this and this is about that. He wants it to be open enough for everyone to say, I respond to this, and this is what I think this is about. And that's interesting because I kind of have the same point of view in my work. And I don't know if it's just because that I don't like to explain it, uh, or if you like to keep the mystery there a little bit. Or I just think that it's sort of like in writing. I think a good writer is someone who, when you write in such a way that other people can sort of experience their own world through your writing, rather than you're writing in a certain way that they have to adhere to your world. So I think what he's trying to do is he's trying to create these worlds. And I think in what the worlds are, they're sort of mostly about, they're sort of about community, and there's sort of a spirituality. And I think there's this sort of strange kind of power and energy that he's interested in. And I think that's what he wants to do. And I think that's what he's trying to do over and over. And he doesn't really ever describe what the symbols are about. This judge or this guy with the hat that reoccurs in his paintings. He doesn't really ever explain him, other than he's just sort of this anchor that the characters in his worlds kind of collect themselves around, or provides this reference. He also paints in a way that one of the things he talks about is sort of creating spaces that are safe and unsafe. Some of his paintings are kind of dangerous places to go to, and then other ones they're sort of more gentle or kind places to go to. I don't know where this one falls in that realm. He also did, and so the other thing that's interesting, which took me a while to understand, is like, what are these letters that are flying around? And part of it is too, in a lot of his paintings, there's like the swirling thing that's going on. A lot of his drawings are circular in reference. Like whatever there is, even if there is like a very well-rendered figurative image, there's still all this other kind of ethereal stuff swirling around it. So he never does like a straight figurative drawing. There's always this element of abstraction to it. And it's usually the world around it that's abstract. And so these letters, it's just him signing his name. They're all the letters of his name, Oliver Lee Jackson. And so in many of his paintings, they're rearranged in different ways. And he's also kind of spelling different things with them. Obviously, love there. And then another thing he's doing, I think he's messing with, he's drawing them in different ways. So like this, to me, looks like an R, but actually, oh yeah, it is the R. But a lot of times he'll make like an S look like a G. And so I think he's spelling different words, and I think he's taking the letters of his name and using them in different ways. So some of the things he spelled is like R-O-I, which is, in French, it's king. He spelled le, ra. And he spelled, and he's also doing these dashes, which is sort of interesting, throughout his name. And I don't know why he's putting dots in there. And then this down here is just the year, 78, and he probably painted it in December. But the 7 is backwards, and the 8 is like an infinity symbol. So a lot of times when he's putting the letters in, he's changing them up so he can spell different things. So he's making what did he do? He makes an O. He makes the O, he doesn't close it, so it'll be a U. On this one, it's closed, but a lot of times on the paintings, he'll not include the top. So he'll be able to spell something with the U. Kind of interesting. Another theory I had, which I don't know if it's true, but reading early on, he just went by Oliver Jackson. Hi there. And I think by adding the Lee, he got a few extra letters to throw in the painting. So that could be one reason why he went by Oliver Lee Jackson. Another thing that I think is interesting about this painting is that it's enamel on canvas. And enamel basically is house paint, which is really interesting. And it's a really hard paint to paint with because, and I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but just on that wall around the corner, there's a big painting in the same style, in a similar sort of abstract expressionist style that's oil paint, looks completely different, very flat, and you can do really, really different things with the paint. With enamel, being house paint, it's not a paint you can mix very well. You can't mix it in advance, so you're basically using it right out of the can. And it doesn't mix with the other paints well because it's very plastic. So it doesn't, there's no distinction. So everything gets muddied really fast. And I've tried to paint with enamel. It's kind of impossible. So it's interesting that he chose it for this work, or for these works. He did a series of work like this. It was about 77 to 82. And then shortly after that, he started just using regular oils. You have a lot more control. You can do a lot more detail. And I think, and one thing that I read about too is these paintings he painted flat, meaning he put them down on the ground and painted this way. Because with enamel, there's no way to paint it on the wall without it just completely sliding down and dripping. And another thing he talked about, which I think is interesting, was that when you paint flat, your perspective of left and right completely changes because you can walk around the whole image. And he talked about, a right-handed painter, for example, when something's on the wall, you'll basically paint like this the whole time. And when you're painting flat, you're forced to address it in a different way. So you can come, you can come from the top, you can come from the side, and all of a sudden your sense of composition completely changes. He also, and what I noticed too about the paintings, I'm assuming, although I don't know if this is correct, that when he paints oil, maybe he sometimes does put them on the wall, rather than the enamel here. But a lot of times too, the perspective on these enamel paintings is overhead. So this character I see like you're looking down, where oddly this character you're looking more this way. You're looking at him straight on, whereas these two guys you're looking down upon them. So I think in this painting on the floor, inadvertently, or maybe not, made him paint from an overhead view because that's how he's looking at the painting. And another interesting thing just in examining the oil, because what you got is when you do wet on wet, meaning when the enamel under here is wet, you're just getting all this mushy stuff where it just completely smears. There's not a lot of, like if this was oil on oil, it would look completely different. And then what's happening here is the red underneath is dry. So this green, he's painting it after he's painted the red, and where it looks like it's smearing, I don't think it is. I think it's just you're seeing through to the red, which is I think is another interesting thing. Like, because this is what enamel does, is it just starts pooling into each other, and it kind of creates this mushiness that probably worked for these type of paintings that he was doing and probably influenced what he was doing with a lot. Like this painting, he probably had to paint it pretty fast. And I think, he talked a lot too about being very deliberate in his painting, which you wouldn't think of looking at this. I mean, a lot of people I would think like, this is a big, fast, messy painting, which is the type of paintings I like a lot of time. But he was very deliberate in what he chose to do. And I think I believe that in that his later work is, I should talk a little bit about his later work, I guess. From about 2000 to the present, these characters in here, what he calls the paint people, they disappear quite a bit. And what you end up with is he's still got his sort of world and his all over world. And by all over, I mean the world is still swirling. It's much more detailed, but these people have sort of receded into the background. You still get one sort of popping through a little bit, but they're not full figures. Sometimes it's just a torso, sometimes it's a head. But the later work, some of them are really, I think, beautiful and sort of a abstract expressionist, sort of more of along the de Kooning lines, but they're a lot more detailed too. He's like spending a lot more time doing, really sort of elaborate, detailed work, like a painting that might take a year or more to make, which is really interesting because I think it's sort of something that grew out of this type of painting. And it's really interesting to see see where it took him, and then just in the sort of on the detailed thing, the marble works are just really extremely detailed, intricate, sort of figurative torsos and stuff, which you wouldn't see looking at this painting.
I think he's more of a sculptor than a painter.
You know, I don't.
I've seen painters who are sculptors, and they tend to sculpt paint like that.
You know, I don't. I'm not really fond of some of the sculptures, and some of them he does in wood too. He does marble, but he does wood and metal. He'll mix, and I don't know if you know the painter Rick Bartow, who also does. Some of his wood and metal works have sort of a Rick Bartow thing going on, which is still kind of this spiritual, tribal.
You know what I mean? That how sculptors.
Uh-huh.
And then you put paint in their hands, like William Tucker.
Uh-huh.
His drawings look like sculptures.
Uh-huh. I don't know. I think he's like a committed abstract expressionist, you know. Yeah. Yeah. Let me see, what else? He's really opinionated. His interviews are, especially later in life, because there's not, him sort of being not super well known, like a Rauschenberg or something, there's not that many interviews and information out there. So one of them is the 1982 Seattle Art Museum catalog, which I had to find and get and read the interview. And then there's a later one, it was an Oakland magazine around 2002. And at that point, he's, 70 some years old, really a little ornery, doesn't like, he's like been painting for, 50, 60, He's black, yeah. And also he was involved with, in St. Louis, a black artist group, which had this sort of, it was a multidisciplinary group that had poets and musicians and painters. And he seems to be sort of an honorary member in that he's not a lot of times listed as an official member, but he's in sort of all the documentation about it that I could find. And he was really influenced by jazz too. He talks about jazz a lot in his paintings. I think his paintings have this sort of movement that is really attuned to music. Yeah, and he, one of the things he does talk about in the more recent interview is that, this black artist thing, like why, he's just not really into it. To him, it's like he's an artist. And, it sort of ruffles ruffles him a bit about that sort of aspect. And also I think it's just, that he's kind of, seems like he's like, I'm done explaining my work, I just want to make the work, And I think he's, he's been painting for 50 or more years, and he just wants to keep painting. It's really kind of interesting, And it's a thing about, like, he believes in, I think he's really a true, committed, like, I'm going to be painting my entire life. He believes in the work, and he believes that it's, speaks for itself. He's sort of he's like, he believes in art as something that can change the world, by just looking at the painting. And I think that's sort of rare. What else do we have about the sort of later work? Oh yeah, he doesn't have many of his paintings up in his studio when he's working, because he says he likes the idea of them more than what they actually are. Because you remember, in the painting you remember what you were trying to do, and you remember what you liked about it, but the actual thing is going to look very different to you than what your idea of it was. So he likes the idea of the painting, and sort of like that kind of, I'm always trying to do something better, or do what the ideal is. It seems like he is an idealist. I would love to see some of his the originals of his later work. And also, if you know Milton Wilson, who the museum has a number of works by, some of his later stuff is doing that, where that it's sort of got a Milton Wilson, partly because of the shapes are similar that he's doing, and also the density is a lot different. So some of the later work looks like an even more detailed. I mean, Milton Wilson's, his work was pretty loose, and it's even more detailed than that. It's really fine sort of brushwork and stuff, but it's still in sort of an abstract expressionist style. What else? Any questions at this point? How's my work changed from like being inspired by this? You know, I think it's sort of like, it's funny, it's sort of the whole, part of it is I see this as like a straight ahead abstract expressionist painting. He believed in that. That's what he's trying to do. He believes in this kind of raw power of getting it out there and getting it on canvas. And I probably believed in that more, although I still believe in this. I think it's like, it's maybe considered these days a little passé, but it always comes back, and there's always there's painters that are doing it today. And I think there's even right now sort of resurgence in painting, a lot of abstract painters in a different way, excuse me, in a way that I think is really influenced by abstract expressionism, but it's sort of veering more towards this color field stuff, really simple stuff. Mary Heilman, a guy named Matt Connors. Laura Owens is a painter who's popular right now, young, doing abstract stuff. It's great, So I think part of the reason my work has changed or why I'm not doing this anymore is that I think you have to be really committed to this. And it's something it's really hard to do. And so I think that it's almost like he's done. It's like if you do it your whole life and you keep doing it and you're committed to it, it's something you can do. But I wasn't ready to say like, this is all I'm gonna do for the next 20 years or something. So I think I'm sort of exploring. I mean, I like work that's, one of the reasons this appealed to me is like, you almost might think this is an outsider artist. He got an undergraduate in painting and he got an MFA in painting, so he was a painter. And he studied in painting and he was an art professor. So this, you would almost think it could be a naive artist or a self-taught artist, or, it's that kind of almost elementary to a lot of people. What was the question? Yeah.
What do you believe in?
Right. So I was saying that I still believe in this. I don't think right now that I have the sort of the patience to do it for 10 years to get to the point where I really like it. Like these paintings, you do a painting like this, something you have to paint probably really fast in this style, because this you can't rework, especially in enamel. It just turns to mud. So he has like one shot at this. And you do it over and over and over, and I mean, it's like 1 out of 10 if you're lucky that you like. So I think like I sort of stepped back maybe and said, and also I'm sort of right now, I'm sort of a little more obsessed with conceptual art and this idea art, and taking ideas and translating those into things that are really particular. Because there's different kinds of artists. There are artists that sort of believe in this, and there's artists that like, I have to know what I'm doing and know what the outcome will be. And I'm maybe a little bit closer to that now. I'm tending to do a lot of studies, like almost endless studies, where I'm like, I'll do this preparatory work and experiment with things before I actually do the thing. So I'm sort of in the midst of that for my Linfield show, trying all these things, but it almost seems like endless, where it's just when will it stop and when will I actually make the work? So I mean, I think I will come back to this, and I think for Linfield I'll probably do a painting show, but painting in quotes.
What's painting?
Yeah, what is painting? So they might be, I'm probably, right now the idea is these kind of pieces of canvas that are sculptural in some way. That's sort of what, but that's all you can call them, is a painting, I think. I've also been making books a little bit more, like one-of-a-kind artist books, and that's an area where you have to be really, I think, particular for them to work. You have to like, everything about them, like what type of paper, what the binding is, how many pages. so that in the end, the viewer doesn't notice all those things. Like, oh, why is it this size? You know, it should be bigger. It'd be so much cooler. So that's just something that is like very particular and very thought out. And I've sort of maybe been doing that a little bit more. Yeah. And I mean, the scale of this, it's awesome. You know, it's great. Yeah, and so I guess what I was going to say about sort of the self-taught painters and the naive painters, I mean, this is in that style, and this is, I guess I wouldn't say it's in that style, it's similar. It can be, you know, it can be compared to that. So I do like things that are very raw like that, and other artists like Tapis, big, messy, crunchy stuff. It's just, I think it's undeniable. And then, but also liking sort of this other refined stuff. I'm not a big fan of minimalism, but I am like a fan of someone like Agnes Martin, which is very, very, very linear, very sort of sharp in some of the paintings, and very grid-like and all that. So it's strange having to choose all those things. And I mean, I think Oliver Lee Jackson, looking at his sculpture, completely different and completely a different approach to making work than something like this. So, you know, I think that exists in every artist, these contradictions. And I mean, he does printmaking, he draws a lot, he does sculpture. So he's obviously working in a lot of fields, and maybe for painting, this is just how he does it. And then when he's can't do it anymore or wants to be very particular, he makes a sculpture. And, you know, works on marble for a year or something like that. Yeah. Questions? Yeah? I didn't. You know, I thought about that, but I didn't. Well, one, because he doesn't like to, you know, he doesn't like to explain his work.
You mentioned Agnes Martin.
Yeah, there's a painting downstairs, Agnes Martin painting downstairs here. And there's also, also I think the other painters that I see in this are painters like Philip Guston, there's one just right around the corner. It's very different, but it's similar in the sense that some would call it very basic, sometimes childlike drawing painting. But he also uses a lot of symbols, Guston does. Symbols where you don't know what they are, what are they supposed to mean, and he's using sort of a series of symbols to create his paintings.
Kind of reminds me of the Cy Twombly work.
It is, yeah, it is in that kind of, you know, Twombly did the big circles,
Yeah.
you know.
And also, he threw a few letters in here and there. And
Right.
His brush work, I think, there's a connection there.
Yeah, for sure. I would say that too, yeah. Another was, I mean, some people have mentioned Basquiat. I see it less. I think the Basquiat thing is from these stick figures that appear, because Basquiat was doing these stick figures. I see his work as a lot more graphic.
More literal.
Yeah, and, but some of the characters in the paintings look the same. Definitely he was into de Kooning, Jackson was. And the Cobra artists and the Cobra movement, that's something that I think is definitely referenced, they were sort of big believers in the, you know, going back to naive, childlike work and bringing that all out.
But it's interesting, he has a little bit more depth than all those other people, though, to me. I feel like Guston and Basquiat are more graphic, perhaps. But even though these are abstracted figures, you still sort of see them in layers. I can kind of see a landscape if I draw it. So all those references make complete sense, but he's also got this, there's a little bit more of a interplay or something, you know?
Yeah, I think he really is going for this kind of, he's going for this world. You know, he's painting the world. And also he didn't believe in mirroring the world. That's another thing he talked about. He's like, who needs a mirror? I'm not trying to mirror what's in the world. I know what world I live in. I'm trying to create a world that is a place that other people can enter. So I think that's really interesting too.
I think the issue of depth that you mentioned is very important because about 10 years prior, in '68, there was a movement in Nigeria, a painter, Uche Okeke. I wrote an article about him a while ago, but he, the way you described this work is very similar. Trying to create a world,
Uh-huh.
and the key is the relationship between figure and ground, because in the works by these Nigerian artists, they were also trying to create worlds, and there was the primacy of figure over ground. Figure and ground, everything in the world is co-constitutive, and a lot of the works have similar, characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
Similar treatment with the paint and the depth, so it looks abstract, and it looks, sloppy and fast, but it is very much trying to be very intentional and using the factors like you described, the reticulation of the paints, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
to create this world.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the artists in this group didn't like to have his paintings out in his studio also because the figures, they felt figures were alive in their studio.
Oh, wow.
And one figure, one night when he was painting late at night, came to life in the studio, and scared him, obviously. So he took the painting down so he could see a really interesting relationship with this. He could work in these figures,
Uh-huh.
It's not trying to pin down exactly what kind of figures they are.
Uh-huh.
It is this world of itself.
Yeah, I see, I think they're sort of like these spirits, Yeah, and he talks about spirituality and stuff a lot. So I think there's sort of these spirits floating through the world. And one of the drawings that the museum has is actually, he's done a lot of collage where he's doing mixed media and affixing things to the canvas, usually a little later. And even the pieces of collage are sort of surrounding and floating around the central figure in this kind of circular motion. I mean, maybe the circle too, also if he's painting flat, is coming from him going around the piece like this. It'd be interesting to know, and I don't have the answer to it, whether when he was painting with oils as opposed to enamels, if he would paint on the wall or if he would still paint flat. I think he probably maybe still painted flat. Yes?
Are there any references to like being influenced by pop culture? When I see this, I have a book here, and there's so many works that I
Mm-hmm.
look at this month, and I'm so happy to be here doing this. I think of like Star Wars and Close Encounters and E.T. and
Huh.
all these like 70s like
Yeah.
and
I haven't.
there's any kind of
No, I haven't seen any reference to that. I mean, the only thing is sort of music. I mean, is the whole jazz thing, but I kind of don't think so because he seemed like a pretty heavy guy, in the sense of like some of the paintings are dangerous and some are safe, and this whole spirituality and stuff. I think he was more, It's true. I mean, they have that kind of, but I didn't ever see any. I mean, the main interview I have from him is from '82. So that's a while back. I mean, obviously, pop culture was around in '82. But no, there wasn't. I don't have see much references to it.
Do you think he had this concept before he started painting this? Was this intentional, or does he just
Go for it.
go for it and start?
Yeah, I think he has like his little library of characters before he's going in, and he probably has like, I would say he knows that he wants to have like a landscape or something, a horizon down here, and maybe when he painted this, he wants to have 3 figures in it, and they're doing a certain thing. But other than that, and he wants to have his anchor character in there.
Do you think, has he ever painted himself? Like, would you maybe think that the reference to the judge
Yeah.
and his name so close together, perhaps maybe
I don't, I mean, it's a possibility. He's never explained it. And when the interview that I read when he's explaining this guy, it's, in sort of vague terms. And also I mean, it could be him. Like this character could change around, like who it actually is. But his name, obviously floats around in all the different paintings.
portraits?
I haven't seen any. I think I think that, because one thing they did ask him if he knew the figures or the beings, and he said yes. But that was his answer, was yes. So yeah, I mean, maybe he applies certain people to them, and yeah, I mean, that would make sense that he's in there somewhere.
Knowing it's a bit abstract expressionist, to me, the figure on the left is pretty sexualized.
Right.
Is that going on in other canvases he's got?
Well, yes, because most of his drawings, when he's drawing the figure, they're nudes. So like all the drawings that the museum has, they're nudes, and I think it's just for him. I've thought about that is that all the characters in his painting seem to be nude. And I think that's just or naked, and I think that's just his view of like we're of this earth and we come here. The judge guy seems to always have clothes on. It looks like to me he's got a hat on and he's got some kind of jacket or something. But he seems to, and it's strange that it seems like he's got his back to everyone on this one. But yeah, most of them in the drawings, and he's done some of the drawings he's done there where they're sort of more just character studies, like he's seen, like it seems like it's a study, like he's painting someone, he's at a park and painting someone sitting on a bench or something, and that's kind of like more of a straight ahead person, although of course something's going on, like crazy lines are coming out of them or something. But all of the other drawings that I've seen and all the paintings, everyone's nude in it. So I think, I don't know, I think he thinks that's just part of the energy and life, whether it's positive or negative sometimes. I think he's got that going on too. What else? How are we doing? Yeah? Yeah. Oh, one thing that's also interesting, I think, the whole spiritual thing is he talked a bit about Noguchi and how that looking at paintings, it's all about perspective and how we are used to what we know about something, what we don't know, and what makes it approachable. So he said a rock. Most people know that a rock is a rock, and when you look at it, there's a rock. But he said Noguchi is someone who's taken the rock and infused this sort of power into it, and the spiritual power. And he talked a bit about that in his paintings, and I think he's trying to infuse these characters with a certain power, like taking these symbols and giving them more than just, this isn't just someone with a trumpet, it's doing something else. I haven't really said like what I think this painting is about, and I mean that sort of to me is not really what appeals to me about it. And like frankly, I don't really have an opinion about what it's about. To me, it's more about the emotional reaction to the painting. Yeah. Anything else? I mean, should we, yeah?
It's almost 7, so we can continue down in the cafe.
All right. Let's, sure.